So we're gonna turn this around and we're gonna start asking you questions. That's the idea for the session this afternoon. So look, welcome. Thank you for staying. Right, it's been a fascinating day so far. I am a reformed software developer, in that was a large portion of my career. Haven't developed code in a long time. Industry Research Development Group, an organization that helps with innovation and R&D. But I've been absolutely fascinated, not just by today, but by last year in terms of the conference, the quality of talks, the quality of the thought, and the stuff that goes on in the conference and so on. I'm absolutely fascinated by some of the things our speakers are doing. I'm going to focus on Carina for a second, because just the open source logistics piece is fantastic. It's like a brilliant idea when Claire originally explained it to me last year when she was talking about this for the first time. But what we'll do is we'll go through, first of all, we'll start here with David. We'll just go through, get all of our speakers to introduce themselves, and then we get into some thoughts about innovation and how open source can help drive innovation across organizations. David.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm David. I am a principal engineer in the platform team in Cloudsmith. We have the booth over there. I've been in Ireland for like 14 years, so I'm mostly Irish at this space. So, got my own. Perfect.
Okay, those three have one. I'll hold that one. We share.
It's, sharing is caring, right? Open source is about share. So, hi, my name is Wolfgang Gehring. I'm the OSPO lead at Mercedes-Benz Tech Innovation, and I also call myself FOSS Ambassador. I try to drive forward open source and inner source within Mercedes-Benz and beyond, and make Mercedes-Benz, or help Mercedes-Benz into becoming a company that truly embraces open source.
Yeah, so my name is Carina Tullman. I'm one of the managing directors of Open Logistics Foundation, and it's on. It's green.
Worst case scenario, borrow fills.
Okay. Now we're talking. Okay. Okay, so Carina Tullman, one of the managing directors of Open Logistics Foundation. So we're based in Germany, but we are a European-wide working initiative. And we bundle like 60 partners, like network partners and members, to work on concrete open source software components for the logistics industry.
And I'm Phil Robb. I head the Ericsson software technology group of companies for Ericsson. This year is my 25th year in open source. I started doing software development professionally in 1982. So I've been around a while. In addition to the role I have at Ericsson, I'm also a board member of the Linux Foundation. I spent 12 years at Hewlett-Packard doing open source, as well as 6 years at the Linux Foundation. I'm also a board member of the Open Infrastructure Foundation, and I work with Sachiko on the LF Europe governing board, as well as the LF Research governing board.
Fantastic. Right. Okay, so innovation is a word that's bandied around quite a bit, right? With all sorts of ideas around it. I'm going to give you a very quick definition, pulling from the global standards on innovation. So innovation described as a new or changed entity realizing or redistributing value. So that's like it's creating something that's valuable to a company, or so it's not the creation of the thing itself; it's the realization of value that's critical in organizations. And we don't have a pure software panel here. We have a lot of hardware involved in physical things when we're talking about logistics and telephony and cars and other bits and pieces. So I'm really interested in, from an organizational perspective, in everyone's unique, specific context, why and how is open source important for innovation in your organization, and what changed? How did people come to take open source innovation seriously? David, we might start with yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how can it not be? Like, we in Cloudsmith, we have built the platform using open source. We provide open source storage and bandwidth for open source products like Caddy, for example, the web server building Go. It's hosted in Cloudsmith. Like my opinion is that probably after 2005, 2007, the world is moving just in open source. Tell me something that happened in the last few years, including LLMs, that could have happened without open source. We're all talking about, LLMs being better at coding than humans. That wouldn't have been possible without having open source to index in their kind of model. I don't think any company nowadays could have been where it is without open source. If you are building applications in Node.js, Node.js is open source. If you are building applications with Python, it's open source. If you go into the other side of .NET, it's also open source. So, yeah.
Let me try and get a bit more specific before we move on, David. So just in relation to Cloudsmith, so what's the specific things that it's changed for you as an organization and it's enabled you to do better and innovate better because of using open source?
Well, we are deeply embedded in AWS. I was talking to a colleague this morning. There is a new provider for Terraform from AWS, and it's quite new. It has some bugs specifically that we found because we use fairly sophisticated features of AWS. And he was patching it this morning. If that driver wasn't, or that provider wasn't open source, we will be talking to AWS as of what's going on. But right now, what we are doing.
Hold up high because.
Okay. Yeah. Up high. Yeah. Okay. Now I know how to hold the microphone. Yeah. So as I was saying, my colleague was patching it, and I suspect it's going to end up in upstream, and that's how we use open source and contribute back to open source.
Sorry, this goes out. No, have I got that?
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Right, Wolfgang. Same question, right? So for Mercedes-Benz, right? Why is it important? Okay, you've been building your own cars, creating your own systems for years. What is it that makes open source valuable for your own organization's innovation?
Right. So one point is you just can't develop software anymore without using open source these days. And this morning we had a panel called Open Source for Collaboration. Now this is open source for innovation, but really is kind of like two sides of the same coin. Can you say that?
Yes.
So one thing is in software development. The other thing is that really, I would say, gave another push at Mercedes is the following. So some of our competitors in China, for example, it feels like they bring out a new car every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Feels like, yeah. Whereas we in Europe, we have, and in North America as well, our cycles for new cars are years because you plan ahead many years, and that's very complicated. And so the realization is like, okay, we need to speed up the innovation and the cycles in which we can produce new reliable cars. And so one aspect here is, why should we reinvent the famous wheel over and over again? For example, so this is not a real example, but it brings the point across. So let's say you get into your car and you have a seat adjustment system, like you adjust your seat. And nobody will buy a Mercedes because it has the best seat adjustment system in industry, which, by the way, of course it does, right? Yeah, but
we'll test the claims later. Okay.
Okay, good. And so, but that's not a feature, that will make people buy that car or not. Why should everyone, develop that software for this again and again? No, let's do this together. And then everyone can concentrate on their distinguishing features and their competitive advantages. For example, we will not open source an algorithm for autonomous driving because maybe that gives us an advantage and that's how we want to sell our car. But on these commodity features, yes, let's work together. And this would sort of kickstarted the software-defined vehicle thing again. And we are now, in fact, collaborating with other OEMs and other companies like, Volkswagen, BMW, and so forth. Before, we would, of course, not work with them. But now it's like, hey, let's working on these commodity features together, develop a software stack together. It's a project called S-Core, and everyone can use it. And it's open source, so I mean, even if you're not in a group, you can still, you know, look at it, use it, whatever. And then we have more time for the other features.
So that segues very nicely into Carina, because you're working with a lot of member companies who are probably half the time competing with each other and occasionally collaborating with each other. So I think I probably have to split the question in two parts for you. One is how it's used, but also how you wrangle these people together, right, to demonstrate that value.
How do we bring them?
Oh, sorry, for Carina.
That was good. Sorry. Yeah, I was like, wait,
I'm pulling your collaboration piece straight into Carina's.
Yeah, but still, that was the perfect bridge that you made with the 80%, because that was like one key finding that our founders, Rinus, Daxa, DB Schenker, and Port of Duisburg had like 4 years ago, that to be honest, 80% of what we do, that we simply don't differentiate from each other. So if we just do it on our own, we lose money every day. And in an industry that is very, very small on margins, we need to bundle forces to really keep the value, the industry, the money, the workforce in Europe, and to still be strong here, because Europe is like one of the hotspots, and especially Germany, for worldwide logistics. And so speaking of open source, for me, and innovation, also the other side of the medal, I wanted to underline that, is that open source is a cultural enabler for innovation in logistics. So the industry is really not known for being very, very cooperative. So they're fighting very hard. And open source brings them together because it brings other people together. So within our organization, I hope no one feels touched now, but it's not the innovation managers that come together and that speak about like, we're doing a lot of with AI and everything works and it blinks and whatever, but it's like the people that have daily pain points they meet in our working groups, and they really want to solve a problem, and jointly they find a solution, and they're so happy that they finally have a result that they were waiting for so long. And so we touch them with their intrinsic motivation, and that keeps them, that really makes them a community that works, and they all feel very close to each other under the umbrella of Open Logistics Foundation. So yeah.
Brilliant. So Robb, like Ericsson, you've been around for a long time as a company. I've been in the Ericsson offices down in Athlone. It's been there for over 50 years. Started as a manufacturing facility where 90% of the staff were female. It's now an engineering patent factory developing software. There was a wonderful ad that one of the team showed me from 1974 was come join Ericsson's Meet Your Husband, which I thought was, you know, so there's been so that shift and change of an organization over all those years, right? That's a lot of change that you've been managing over many, many years. So how does open source innovation, how does open source help drive the innovation, help you respond to that sort of change?
Well, I guess first I would say clearly Ericsson is an innovative company if they're putting out ads like that back in the 70s. You know, to come get a husband. So that just we're following along that tradition. I'm going to give some examples of not only innovation around open source, but why that is benefited by the contribution of open source. And I'll give a few examples. So modern software technology is based on containers. It's based on microservices. It's the ability to move something from your own hardware to a cloud somewhere, either your own private or someplace in the public. This is how modern software is made, and that entire underpinning is open source software. To the point where if you look at any given commercial software that's out there, by and large, 80% plus, another 80% number, 80% plus of that lines of code is actually open source software. So if you're a software generating company, if you don't have mastery of that 80% of software that makes up your product, you're clearly not as efficient as you could be. And so for Ericsson, a lot of the folks who are doing this container, Kubernetes, cloud native software, mostly at the Linux Foundation, most of them are enterprise companies. They're the hyperscalers and so forth. They care about what happens inside of a data center. Well, we care what happens outside in a network, in a live place. So bare metal deployment is really important to us. The ability to take a machine that has nothing on it and deploy software on it, manage the life cycle of that software on this remote physical machine is important to us, but we want to do it on top of the Kubernetes ecosystem. So bare metal deployment is one of the projects that Ericsson leads with Red Hat, something called MetalCube, inside of that CNCF ecosystem. We care about security. We care about data that's encrypted at rest as well as in flight. So we go to different open source projects and we say, hey, you're not encrypting your logs. We think that's important and we'd like to do that for you. And so we go off and we do that. One of the big pushes now, and the reason why this is all based on innovation, is if you want to do AI inference, you're doing it on Kubernetes. Well, Kubernetes 3 years ago did not do inference very well. Over the last 3 years, that entire ecosystem has been working to make inference run really well on Kubernetes. This is where MCP comes into play, and it will be running, MCP will be working on top of Kubernetes, getting agents to talk to one another. So all of these new innovative concepts that are evolving at extremely rapid pace are all being done in this open source ecosystem. So if you can't adapt your software to those different platforms to leverage that work that everybody else is doing, then you immediately fall behind. So this is one area where we're focused. We recently just took over creating our own Linux. We want to be able to have the flexibility of having only use cases that Ericsson are using inside of our computers that sit at the bottom of the cell tower, as well as the radio, the rectangular things you see sitting on top of the cell tower. We want to have a Linux in those devices that is as small a footprint and as securable as possible. But between the fact that now we have our own Linux and we do so much work in the Kubernetes ecosystem, it means that our different product teams who are building applications on top of Kubernetes that runs through the Linux operating system down to our custom hardware now have a path where we can create new and cool things because we control the entire stack. Ericsson hasn't done that since they built their own stuff, soup to nuts, 25 years ago.
So I'm going to pause you at that one because that actually is a brilliant segue into the next question, Rob, which is that decision point, right, between do it ourselves versus using the open source, and it's a continually moving edge and a horizon, right? You go back 20, 30 years. You had, the US military famously was developing all its own technology, proprietary, and then commercial technology accelerated to such an extent the military couldn't keep up. So it essentially started to incorporate commercial and obviously did certain things around it. For a company like Ericsson, right, where is that decision point between where you use open source and where that 20%, right, the we write it ourselves piece? That makes you the money ultimately, right?
And it's a great question. And it's really one of, first let's talk about the intellectual property dividing line. Okay, so the telecom industry is based on standards and innovation that are deeply rooted inside of what Ericsson's 150-year history goes to. We have engineers that spend an inordinate amount of time on optimizing spectrum to squeak every last bit and byte out of what gets sent over those radios as possible. It is our differentiating secret sauce. So we don't do things directly into that place. That is where our IP is our differentiation. That is our secret sauce. But I also want to mention that I would argue that Ericsson's other secret sauce is the developers that we nurture in the communities in which we heavily rely. What isn't known well, and it's something that the hyperscalers, for example, and other companies in the US understand well, is when you have the ability to have soft power in open source ecosystems on which you depend, getting those changes that you require up and accepted into those communities goes much, much faster, much, much more efficiently. So investing in having developers that spend their time building credentials, helping others in the community. This is how you build soft power, and that's ultimately what it is. You'll notice I never use the term contribute back, do the right thing, be a good citizen. I might believe those things, and I know that that's a big reason why developers come and work at Ericsson, but I have yet to have a business executive ever respond to that in a positive way. So it's out of my vocabulary because it isn't needed, because there are extremely valuable strategic reasons why you actually want people in open source projects. My job is basically to translate open source community speak to business speak, because there's value in corporations being part of open source and corporations participating in open source for corporations' benefit.
Brilliant. Carina, so again with that boundary for, and again because you're dealing with a lot of different companies, right? And the boundary is probably going to be different for some of those companies. How does that work? How do those decisions work? And has that ever caused problems inside in the Open Logistics Foundation?
So you mean to find consensus in the working groups that we have, right?
How hard is it to do that? How hard is it to find consensus? And you know, does somebody want to race ahead and develop all the stuff themselves? Somebody else wants to, you know, so how do you deal with that sort of conflict?
Yeah, so we were asked that question quite a lot of time because there are so many competitors in one room. But honestly, until now, we didn't have a problem. So this is the good news. So what I really like about the open source world, so we just started 4 years ago, as I said, and I have a long background in the logistics industry. And what I really like here is that it's not about talking, it's about doing. And in the end, it's like in the working groups, you can say we need to do this and that and this and that. But in the end, it's like who really takes the task and does it, has a footprint in the result. And the others can't yell that it didn't go in the right direction like they had in mind when they simply don't do anything. And until now, that consensus-oriented way of working that we have totally fits. And whenever there are big questions that the group can't answer by themselves, because it's like the member companies send their experts and software developers into the working groups. And whenever there is a barrier that we can't cross on our own, we just get the right experts from external companies in to help develop us, to give legal support or whatever. And this gives the whole thing so much credibility that there's just a big trust in what they do together. So okay. I hope we don't come there, but until now it's good.
That's great. So Wolfgang, and
just so I can just add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And but the other part of it, I'd like you to think about as well is right. So you're dealing with, obviously everyone's dealing with patents and other things, but you're dealing with sort of regulations around safety and consumers and different standards in different countries and all of that sort of stuff in terms of platforms and so on. So in terms of that shift and building on what Carina said, how do you deal with all of that as well?
Okay, so first, adding to what Carina said, I like that, you can yell all you want, but if you don't bring anything to the table, then you just have an opinion. But yeah, okay, that's good, because so in our software-defined vehicle space, in one of the projects there, it's also, so the idea is for all is code first, not talking, because we've tried that approach. Yeah, not talking, and then maybe do something. Now it's code first. You bring the code to the table, and then we can talk about that. And so that has worked quite nicely so far. So we brought code, and then it was reviewed by BMW. It was then another company. They came and added code to that, and so that is developing really nicely. But you have to do something and not just talk. I like that. And so now your other question.
So the boundary for you in terms of we have these open sources that we're building on, right? Where do you set the boundary, and how then do you deal with things like, you know, intellectual property, patents, other challenges you might have as part of that?
So where do you set the boundary for what you contribute, or?
Well, between what you contribute and to Rob's point, like you might contribute because you think it influences and is good long term for you, even though you're giving stuff away. But what do you hold back? What do you focus on doing yourself? And how do you set that boundary?
Yeah, okay. So basically, when you contribute to open source, you want another developer to have a look at as well. And if it's maybe crucial, then you might want to have a manager look at it as well. And, if you're in doubt, ask the governance team or lawyers, is that intellectual property that we maybe don't want to give away? Usually, engineers have a pretty good feeling there. Like, again, what I said, just as an example, autonomous driving algorithms, we probably don't want to publish that. Yeah. Seat adjustment, okay, fine. Right? Yeah. So that, I guess most engineers, they if you trust them, they usually have a pretty good opinion. But there is a system that, when you contribute, please, check with someone. Also like patents, same thing and so forth.
David, then for Cloudsmith.
Yeah, for us it's a bit different. I think we are not a hardware-based company. We are mostly a software-based company. So we use a lot of open source. We have contributed back to some projects. To give you one example, we use an async server for Python, which we couldn't monitor because it didn't have metrics. And one of the engineers in the team actually added metrics and contributed back upstream. I think it's a very different position. Our mantra is, if it exists, don't build it unless you have a reason. Like I will arguably say that the car is way more complex than Cloudsmith, but I was fascinated when I joined this company how deep package management is, an artifact supply chain. So we have a lot of territory to cover. If you can't have a box, which is sitting there and works, you don't need to open the box unless something is broken, and then you go fix it. And because usually it's open source, you just go back into the upstream and say, hey, I found this issue. Can you please take this? Some people can use it as well. I think in general, like we will always use before building. Obviously, that doesn't work for our autonomous driving algorithm, which is our package management algorithm. We have some sophistication, compute on the edge, which is like its IP. We can't distribute that, and we don't want to distribute that. But in general, we are on the approach of don't build custom things because they usually end up backfiring.
So AI has come up a number of times already today. It came up in the collaboration discussion this morning where they mentioned this panel this afternoon. I know Catherine will be chairing a panel in a few minutes. We'll be looking specifically at AI. But just very briefly, because AI is reshaping an awful lot of things not in software development, but also in processes and systems inside organizations. So where do you see the opportunities in your sector to use open source in the next sort of 3 to 4 years? David, we'll start with you. Yeah,
I think it's a nuclear blast in the software sector. I don't buy this common, we are not going to need developers or accountants or lawyers in 12 months. I think it's going to change the work we do. So it's going to change in education and everywhere else. My opinion is that we are living probably one of the most exciting times since I am a developer in the industry. Also, my opinion is that we're working into the dragon's lair because everybody's rooted in the big company models. And there's an emerging trend, which is what about the models I can execute locally in my computer? I think that's where the most innovation is going to come in the next few years. But to be honest, my feeling is that the world is going to change forever. I can give you one example. I lecture in a college just close to here, CCT College. I do that like once or twice a week just because I like it. And I really enjoy lecturing. And the framework for education in Ireland hasn't adapted to LLMs yet. So you have students which go into an assignment, go into ChatGPT, copy and paste the assignment, copy and paste back, and that's a 10 out of 10. And then they graduate, apply to companies, you interview them, and it's like, well, I don't really question you can code with an LLM. Everybody can do that today, but can you make decisions around what you should not be coding, which is most important than what you can code? So I think that's where my opinion is at the moment. I think it's transformative in the society.
Wolfgang?
Yeah, I'm with you there. It is changing a lot of things. It's not changing. So at home I have a smart speaker, and I'm not going to mention the company now, but it's, to be fully honest, it's still as dumb as it was 5 years ago. As if AI wasn't a thing these days, you know. So that puzzles me a little bit. But so in the next few years, you know, in the car, so you can talk to a Mercedes. You can say, "Hey, Mercedes, drive me to wherever," or like, you know, give the destination, and you can say, "Hey, Mercedes, do this or that." You know, most functions in the car, you can say, "Hey, do this, do that." Yeah, you can also ask it, "Hey, Mercedes, what do you think of a BMW?" And it has many answers to, yeah, but one of them is, "No, what is your opinion of BMW?" And it says, "I think I have the same opinion as you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here."
I'm assuming that's a proprietary answer as opposed to an open source one, right?
Oh yeah, that's not recorded, is it?
No.
No. Okay, no, it's just a bit.
We're not live streaming. We're okay. We're okay.
It's just a bit of humor there, you know. Yeah, but so inside the car, you know, people expect that these days, of course, you know, you get into your car and it's actually smart. And it's a distinguishing feature. Like, people buy cars because it can do that really well or not. So that means, you know, you have to stay on top here. And we have a lot of people at home who are really, really good, smart AI engineering people who take care of that. I'm not one of these people. Like, I'm not a super expert in AI, but that's changing that. Also, obviously, you know, in making software, creating software, obviously, right? AI is helping. So also in internal processes and so forth. So there are a lot of things, and I agree, absolutely, it's going to change a lot of things still. Agentic AI now is a thing, and, you know, let's see where that is going. It will be very interesting. I'm not afraid, you know, it will take all of our jobs. I think it's helping me in my work, and that's a good thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So, Carina, for the logistics.
Yeah, so having a long background in a research institute, you saw a lot of trends coming and going. You were afraid of so many things. And then there was something new popping up, like, for example, also like 10 years ago, virtual reality, augmented reality. What was possible? So many flowery pictures. And just a bit of those pictures really turned into reality. And sometimes I have the feeling with AI that everyone is a bit overestimating what it can do. So I totally share that opinion. I also don't feel threatened looking at my job. And for logistics, it's true in so many places in the supply chain. So it will help us a lot, collecting training data and whatever, but I don't see like jobs disappearing too much or whatever. It will help us, but I see the effect a bit smaller than sometimes like it's written or colored in pictures.
We turn to Phil, and Phil's going to say, we're all doomed, right? Completely disagree with everything everybody's.
Well, it was my job to be controversial, wasn't it? So I'm going to talk a little moonshotty blue sky here, because it does ultimately impact Ericsson, and I think pretty much everybody else. Who in the room has heard of OpenClaw? Good. And Moltbook, of course, to go along with it. Yes. Okay, so for those that haven't heard about this, it really is something that's taken off in the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's a set of localized agents and artificial intelligence that runs on Mac. So as the story goes, there are no more Mac Minis in any electronics store in Silicon Valley because they've all been purchased. And what it will do for you is, with your credit card in tow, it will go off to different websites, and agentically it'll go through your mails, it'll go through everything on your hard drive, it'll understand who you are, and it'll start doing things on your behalf. And in the 80-20 rule, many stories of amazing things that this new piece of open source software does. Of course, it has also, entered some individual into a $3,000 course on Coursera that he didn't really want to take. So you got to be careful with the credit card that you give, but it is back to the point of, one of the mantras of open source is release early, release often. And you release incomplete code that can do all kinds of obscure things that you didn't really want it to do. But the point is you get it into the hands of a bunch of folk who can then begin to play with it. Now, OpenClaw was written and released by a guy in Austria. There you go. He's in the EU. Moltbook is by an individual that is purportedly in the States. ChatGPT couldn't give me a good answer on exactly where he was from. But point being is, innovation is happening all over the place. For Ericsson, for us, we're trying to open up more value out of the network, right? When 5G came along, you can do network slicing. So if you need to have improved latency, you can get a slice so that, data is going back and forth from your device like a car because you really want to get response from the network in a timely manner. So, those are the types of things. Plus, if you're doing some kind of live stream in 8K, you might want to boost your bandwidth and pay for that for a little bit. Well, tie that to agentic activities and the ability to optimize a network on your agent's behalf when that's needed. So there will be a play there, right? And Ericsson wants to understand that and be part of that. But, what is often said about new revelational technologies is it's often overhyped in how fast it happens. It's often underhyped in the impact that it has. And we have to think about that as well. So this is just the next small step. OpenClaw for me is just the next small step in a bunch of way cool things that we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years. And so come out in open source, the fact that it will evolve because it's open source is a direct relationship to the way innovation works very quickly because of open source.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. We're just out of time. I'm not going to go through and ask you for lots more comments and anything else. Any thought that has occurred to you over the last half an hour, 45 minutes that you'd like to share with our audience? Anything that kind of sprung to mind, even in the middle of the discussion or something somebody else said? Anybody like to have the final word?
Yeah,
Carina,
so the question was before, like, how do you decide whether open source or proprietary software? And for us, of course, the framing is a bit different. So for us, it's the question, like, would that be a project or a working group under the umbrella of Open Logistics Foundation? So meaning this is commodity for logistics. And we always ask one simple question, and this is, do you think that your customer buys that for you? Do you earn money with that? And whenever the answer is honestly no, then we are with this 80% again. And then we try to work together on those components. And when the answer is no, this is what we are really chosen for, then we are the rest of 20%. So the USPs. So just this small question about where does your money come from? It's really a game changer in the head.
That goes to the heart of value creation, right? So that's a brilliant.
Yeah, kind of like, is it nice to have or is it essential to have? Do you really want it?
Very quickly, so I know, David, you had a comment?
Yeah, it's piggybacking the OpenClaw thing. Like, OpenClaw was built by a single guy in less than 3 months, I think, mostly written by AI, which is the scary part. And that makes me think, who is open source going to be in 5 years? So.
And I guess the last thing I want to leave everybody with is, I came to the realization 3 months ago or so that when the Linux Foundation puts out developer stats, it's always a third in Asia, a third in the US, and a third in Europe. But when I look at the companies that are at the top of the leaderboards across all the major projects in open source, they're very heavily skewed towards the US and some China. So it's not as though the talent isn't in Europe, it's that American companies hire and pay the talent in Europe. So you have the ability to pivot if you so choose.
Bill, Carina, Wolfgang, David, thank you all very much. That's been a fabulous and insightful discussion. So thank you.